My wife, Emily, always knew how to make an impression. Whether it was her confident stride in high heels or the way she could light up a room with a laugh, she was the kind of woman people remembered. That was one of the reasons I fell for her. But lately, that confidence felt less like a shared joy and more like a wall between us. We'd been married for 12 years, a mix of fiery arguments, passionate reconciliations, and shared dreams. But something had changed. At first, it was little things: Emily's sudden preoccupation with her appearance, the faint scent of cologne on her clothes that wasn't mine, and a locked phone she was quick to grab any time I got too close. But when she started working late more often than not, the knot in my stomach told me something was very wrong. On a rainy Tuesday evening, I decided I couldn't ignore the signs anymore. The tension in our home had reached a breaking point, silent yet suffocating. I had tried addressing it, but Emily dismissed my concerns with a laugh or a curt, "You're imagining things." For a man who prided himself on clarity, it felt like my world was turning opaque. That's when I reached out to Marcus. Marcus was an old friend and, conveniently, a private investigator. When I called, he listened patiently as I spilled every doubt, every suspicion, and every sleepless night. "Look, Jack," he said after I finished. "I'll take a look, but you need to be prepared for what I might find. This road doesn't always lead to closure, it might just lead to more questions." By the following weekend, Marcus had evidence. He tailed Emily to an upscale downtown restaurant, and later, to a boutique hotel. Photos showed her with a man in a tailored suit, laughing and touching his arm in a way she hadn't touched mine in months. My chest tightened as I flipped through the images, each one feeling like a stab to my already fragile heart. But it wasn't just the man. It was Emily's face, her radiant, carefree expression, a version of her I hadn't seen in years. She wasn't just betraying me, she was thriving in it. Marcus's voice broke through my daze. "His name's Daniel. Owns a real estate firm. Married, with 2 kids. 2 kids. The irony wasn't lost on me. We had 2 kids ourselves, Claire and Ethan, both still innocent to the fracture in their parents' marriage. How would I ever explain this to them? I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the house sounded like a ghost of the life Emily and I had built together. As dawn broke, I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront her, not yet. I needed to gather my thoughts, lay the groundwork, and figure out what came next. Emily had been meticulous in her deceit. I needed to be just as meticulous in my response. That morning, I kissed her goodbye as she left for another late meeting. My smile didn't waver, and neither did hers. But as her car disappeared down the street, I felt the weight of what was to come. The battle for my marriage, or perhaps its demise, had just begun. The house was quiet when I returned that evening. Claire and Ethan were upstairs, their laughter occasionally breaking through the silence. It was a reminder of the innocence I was determined to protect, even as my world threatened to collapse. Emily wouldn't be home for hours. Another client dinner. She had texted earlier in the day, as if I hadn't already seen the truth behind her lies. I poured myself a drink and stared at the photographs Marcus had sent me. The images were crisp, undeniable evidence of Emily's betrayal. The man, Daniel, looked like the kind of polished executive she used to make fun of when we were younger. His perfectly styled hair, expensive suit, and easy charm had drawn her in. I wondered what part of him filled the void she claimed I couldn't. I spent hours at the dining table, oscillating between rage and despair. Every memory with her felt tainted, every promise broken. But beneath the anger, a darker thought whispered, had I failed her somehow? Was there something I'd missed, a part of myself I'd withheld? I shook the thought away. No, this wasn't my fault. She made the choice. She lied. She betrayed. By the time Emily's car pulled into the driveway, I was ready. I tucked the photos back into the manila envelope Marcus had given me and slid it into the desk drawer. For now, I needed her to think everything was normal. There was no point in tipping my hand until I understood the full scope of her affair. I had Marcus digging into Daniel's background and keeping tabs on their movements. It was only a matter of time before I had enough to make my next move. The door opened, and Emily walked in, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. She looked radiant, her makeup fresh and her hair impeccably styled. The faint scent of floral perfume wafted toward me as she set her purse on the counter. "You're up late," she said, her tone casual. "I thought you'd be in bed." "Couldn't sleep," I replied, forcing a smile. "How was dinner?" Her expression didn't falter. "Productive. We've got a few potential leads on new clients." She grabbed a glass from the cabinet and poured herself some water. "How about you? How was your day?" "Same old," I said, watching her carefully. She was good at this, too good. If I didn't know better, I would have believed every word. "The kids were asking about you, though. Ethan wanted to know if you'd help him with his science project this weekend." Emily hesitated for the briefest moment, her hand pausing on the rim of her glass. "Of course," she said smoothly. "I'll set aside some time for him. It's just been so busy at work lately." Busy. That word had become her shield, her excuse for every late night, every missed dinner, every lingering look at her phone when she thought I wasn't watching. "Good," I said, leaning back in my chair. "They miss you." Her eyes flicked to mine, searching for something, reassurance, perhaps, or a hint of suspicion. When she found neither, she smiled and kissed me lightly on the cheek. "I'm going to shower," she said, disappearing up the stairs. I waited until I heard the water running before I opened her purse. My hands trembled as I rifled through its contents, searching for anything that might give me more answers. A wallet, keys, a small makeup bag, and then I found it. A crumpled receipt from a restaurant, dated tonight for 2 people. I scanned the items: a bottle of wine, 2 entrees, and dessert. No mention of client dinner. No indication this was anything but a romantic evening for 2. The rage I'd buried earlier surged to the surface, hot and consuming. I clenched the receipt in my fist, my nails digging into the fragile paper. She didn't even have the decency to hide it properly. Or maybe she didn't care if I found out. By the time she came downstairs, wrapped in a towel with her damp hair cascading over her shoulders, I had calmed myself enough to play the part of the oblivious husband. She smiled at me as she passed, heading toward the bedroom. "I'll see you in bed," she said, her voice soft. I nodded, my jaw tight. "I'll be there in a bit." As the bedroom door clicked shut behind her, I stared at the receipt in my hand. This wasn't just about infidelity anymore. It was about the blatant disrespect, the audacity to parade her lies so openly. The next morning, I called Marcus. "Keep digging," I told him. "I want every detail about Daniel, every move they make. If they so much as glance at each other, I want to know." "What's the plan?" Marcus asked, his tone cautious. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But when I figure it out, they'll regret ever thinking they could get away with this." The days blurred into each other, an uneasy routine masking the storm brewing beneath the surface. Emily continued her charade of client dinners and late meetings, her lies growing bolder with each passing day. But thanks to Marcus, I had a front-row seat to her betrayal. Marcus was thorough. Over the next week, he sent me a steady stream of updates. Photos of Emily and Daniel sharing private dinners, their hands brushing across the table. Text messages between them, carefully extracted from her phone while she was distracted at a coffee shop. They spoke in a language of secrecy, coded phrases, inside jokes, but the intent was clear. They were planning something. A trip, perhaps. Somewhere far enough away that they could shed their respective obligations and play at being a real couple. One night, after the kids were asleep, Marcus called me with an update that made my blood run cold. "Jack, they're booked at a resort," he said. 3 nights next weekend. A cabin in the mountains, secluded enough to avoid suspicion. My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles turned white. "Where?" Marcus hesitated. "It's about 3 hours north, near Lake Pines." "I've got the address." I swallowed hard, the bow rising in my throat. "Send it to me." Emily's betrayal was no longer a suspicion or a series of coincidences. It was real, and it was happening in real time. I had the proof, the dates, and the location. The only question now was how far I was willing to go to confront her. The following Friday, Emily floated into the house with a suitcase in hand. She dressed for travel, jeans, a fitted sweater, and her favorite boots. Her smile was bright, almost too bright, as if she were daring me to notice how happy she was. "Hey," she said, placing the suitcase by the door. "I'm heading out. The conference starts early tomorrow, and the team decided to carpool tonight." I forced a smile. "Sounds like a packed weekend." She nodded, avoiding my gaze. "It'll be exhausting, but worth it. I'll call when I get settled." The lies flowed so easily now. It took everything in me not to grab her by the shoulders and demand the truth. But I held back. I wasn't ready for the confrontation yet. "Drive safe," I said instead, my voice even. "Call me if you need anything." "I will." She leaned in and kissed me, her lips brushing mine with a practiced ease. For a moment, I almost believed her. Almost. As her car disappeared down the street, I made my move. Marcus had already arranged everything. A rental car parked a few blocks away, a GPS tracker discreetly placed on Emily's vehicle. By the time she was halfway to the resort, I was already tailing her, keeping a safe distance to avoid detection. The drive to the mountains was long and quiet, giving me too much time to think. Every mile brought me closer to the inevitable confrontation, yet I still hadn't decided how it would play out. Would I storm in and expose her lies, or would I wait for her to return, pretending everything was normal while I gathered more evidence for the divorce? The cabin came into view as I rounded a bend in the road. It was a picturesque retreat, nestled among the pines with a stunning view of the lake. Emily's car was parked in the gravel driveway, alongside a sleek black sedan I assumed belonged to Daniel. The sight of them together, so brazen in their deception, ignited a fire in my chest. I parked my car down the road and made my way toward the cabin on foot, careful to stay out of sight. The curtains were drawn, but the warm glow of the fireplace flickered through the windows. As I crept closer, I could hear their laughter, muffled but unmistakable. The sound turned my stomach. Peeking through a gap in the curtains, I saw them sitting on the couch, a bottle of wine between them. Emily's head rested on Daniel's shoulder, her fingers tracing lazy patterns on his chest. It was intimate, casual, the kind of moment she used to share with me. My hands curled into fists as I watched her lean in and kiss him, her body melting against his. I turned away, unable to stomach any more. The air was cold, biting at my skin, but I barely felt it. My mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, anger, betrayal, and a flicker of regret for the life we'd built together. But one thought stood out above all others: this wasn't going to end here. By the time I got back to my car, I had a plan. This wasn't just about catching Emily in the act. It was about making sure she couldn't manipulate her way out of the consequences. I called Marcus. "I need the divorce papers expedited," I said, my voice steady. "And make sure they include everything we talked about. The house, custody, the works." "Are you sure about this, Jack?" Marcus asked. "Once you file, there's no going back. There's nothing left to go back to," I replied. "Just get it done." As I hung up, I looked back at the cabin one last time. Emily had made her choice, and now I was making mine. By the time she returned, her carefully constructed web of lies would come crashing down around her. And I'd be there to watch it all fall apart. The drive home from the cabin was a blur, a haze of anger and heartbreak clouding my thoughts. Emily's laughter echoed in my mind, taunting me, mingled with the vision of her entwined with Daniel. Every mile I drove felt heavier than the last, each rotation of the tires pulling me further from the life I thought I knew. When I got home, the house was still. Claire and Ethan were fast asleep, their soft breaths the only sound in the quiet darkness. I stood in the doorway of their rooms for a long time, watching them, my resolve hardening with every passing second. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about protecting them from the fallout of Emily's selfishness. The next morning, I called Marcus to finalize the paperwork. "Everything's in motion," he said. You'll have the divorce documents by Monday. The private investigator's report will back up your claims if it comes to court. Good, I said, my voice clipped. What about the financials? Did you get the account logs? Marcus hesitated. Not yet. Emily's been careful. There's nothing obvious in your joint accounts. If she's hiding anything, it's either under Daniel's name or in a separate account. I clenched my jaw, anger simmering just beneath the surface. Keep digging. She's not going to walk away from this clean. Emily returned home Sunday evening, the same radiant smile on her face as when she'd left. Her suitcase clattered onto the floor as she greeted the kids with hugs and kisses, her tone warm and cheerful. To anyone else, she might have seemed like the perfect wife and mother. But I knew better. Hey, she said, stepping into the kitchen where I was chopping vegetables for dinner. Did you survive the weekend without me? Barely, I said with a forced smile, sliding the knife across the cutting board. How was the conference? Her eyes flickered, just for a moment, before her mask of confidence slipped back into place. Exhausting, she said, dropping into a chair at the table. But productive. We got so much done. I nodded, watching her carefully. Did you bring back any souvenirs? Her smile faltered. No, not this time. It was all work, no play. My stomach churned at her audacity. I turned back to the counter, gripping the knife so tightly my knuckles turned white. You must be tired, I said evenly. Why don't you take a shower? Dinner will be ready soon. Thanks, she said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. I held perfectly still, letting her scent wash over me like poison. As soon as she was out of sight, I pulled her suitcase into the living room. My heart pounded as I unzipped it, rifling through neatly folded clothes and toiletries. I wasn't sure what I was looking for until I found it, a receipt, tucked into the side pocket, from a luxury spa near the cabin. Couples massage, it read, along with a time and date that coincided perfectly with her weekend conference. I shoved the receipt into my pocket and zipped the suitcase closed just as Emily came down the stairs. Her damp hair clung to her shoulders, and she looked relaxed, refreshed. Smells good, she said, peering into the kitchen. What are we having? Roast chicken, I replied, my voice steady. Go set the table. The kids will be down in a minute. She nodded, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. The dinner was uneventful, but I couldn't stop watching her. Every laugh, every word, every casual glance felt calculated now, like she was performing for an audience. The kids, blissfully unaware, chattered about school projects and soccer practice. Emily smiled and nodded, the perfect picture of maternal affection. I could barely eat. Every bite tasted like ash, the food sitting heavy in my stomach. When dinner was over and the kids had retreated to their rooms, I confronted her. Emily, I said, my voice low. We need to talk. She looked up from the sink, where she was rinsing plates. What's up? I pulled the receipt from my pocket and held it up. What's this? Her face went pale, the color draining from her cheeks. For a moment, she was frozen, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. Where did you find that? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. In your suitcase, I said, my tone sharp. Couples massage? That's a hell of a conference. Her mouth opened and closed, her mind scrambling for a response. Jack, I can explain. Don't, I snapped, cutting her off. Don't insult me with more lies. I know where you were, Emily. I know who you were with. She stared at me, her eyes wide with panic. It's not what you think, she said quickly. Daniel is just a colleague. Stop, I said, slamming the receipt onto the counter. I've seen the photos. I've read the messages. I know everything. Her breath hitched, her hands trembling as she reached for me. Jack, please. Don't touch me, I said, stepping back. You've been lying to me for months, sneaking around, humiliating me. And for what? For him? Tears filled her eyes, spilling down her cheeks. I didn't mean for this to happen, she whispered. I was lonely, Jack. You're always so distant, so consumed with work. I just needed to feel alive again. And destroying our family made you feel alive? I said, my voice rising. Was it worth it, Emily? Was he worth it? She didn't answer, her sobs filling the silence between us. I stared at her, the woman I'd loved for 12 years, now a stranger wearing my wife's face. Get out, I said finally, my voice cold and detached. Pack your things and leave. Jack, please, she begged, reaching for me again. We can fix this. There's nothing to fix, I said. You made your choice, Emily. Now you have to live with it. Emily didn't leave that night. Despite my demand, she stood frozen in the kitchen, her tear-streaked face a mask of despair. Her words faltered, tumbling over each other, as she begged me to reconsider. But I was done listening. I turned away from her, retreating to the sanctuary of my office and locking the door behind me. The weight of the confrontation hit me like a tidal wave. I dropped into my chair, running a hand through my hair as my heart pounded against my ribs. For so long, I had imagined this moment, rehearsing what I would say and how I would act. But now that it was here, I felt hollow. The anger was still there, burning low like embers, but it was drowned out by something deeper, grief. I stared at my desk, cluttered with reminders of a life we had built together. Bills with both our names. Family photos, including one of the kids from last Christmas. Emily and I had stood on either side of them, our smiles wide and bright. Looking at it now, I wondered if she'd already started seeing Daniel by then. How long had she been lying to me, to all of us? My phone buzzed, breaking me out of my thoughts. It was a text from Marcus. The divorce papers are ready. Let me know when you want to file. I stared at the screen for a long time before typing back. I'll bring them by tomorrow. It's time. The next morning, Emily was still there. She sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, staring blankly out the window. The kids were already at school, leaving us alone in the tense silence. You're still here, I said, my voice colder than I intended. She looked up at me, her eyes red and puffy from crying. Jack, we need to talk. There's nothing to talk about, I replied, grabbing my briefcase. You've said enough. Please, she said, her voice breaking. Just give me a chance to explain. I hesitated, the weight of her plea pressing down on me. Part of me wanted to walk out the door and never look back, but another part, some stubborn remnant of the love I'd once felt, made me sit down across from her. Fine, I said, folding my arms. Explain. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she set her cup down. I never wanted to hurt you, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't even know how it got to this point. Daniel was he was someone who listened when I felt invisible. Invisible? I scoffed. That's rich, Emily. You had everything, this house, our family, my trust. And you threw it away for a man who listened? It wasn't like that, she insisted, tears welling in her eyes. At first, it was just harmless flirting. I didn't think it would go anywhere, but then you couldn't stop. I finished for her. Because he made you feel special, right? Because I wasn't good enough? Her face crumpled, her tears spilling over. That's not fair, Jack. I've loved you for 12 years, but somewhere along the way, we lost each other. I was lonely. I needed something more. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. And you didn't think to tell me that before you started sleeping with someone else? Her silence was answer enough. The rest of the day passed in a fog. I dropped the kids off at my parents' house, telling them it was just for the weekend so Emily and I could work through some things. Claire had looked up at me with those big, curious eyes, but thankfully, she didn't ask any questions. Ethan, always the more observant of the two, just nodded solemnly. After that, I drove to Marcus's office. He greeted me with a folder containing the divorce papers, neatly organized and ready to file. I flipped through them, my heart sinking with every page. This was real. This was the end. Are you sure about this? Marcus asked, his tone careful. Once you file, there's no going back. I'm sure, I said, my voice steady. She made her choice. He nodded, sliding a pen across the desk. Sign here. My hand shook as I scrawled my name on the dotted line. When I was finished, Marcus took the papers and stood. I'll take care of the filing. You should expect a court date within the month. Thanks, I said, rising to my feet. For everything. Take care of yourself, Jack, Marcus said, clapping a hand on my shoulder. This won't be easy, but you'll get through it. When I got home that evening, Emily was gone. Her car wasn't in the driveway, and her closet was half empty. A note sat on the kitchen counter, her familiar handwriting scrawled across the page. Jack, I'm sorry for everything. I'm staying with my sister for now. Please let me know when we can talk about the kids. Emily. I crumpled the note in my hand and tossed it in the trash. The house felt emptier than ever, its silence oppressive. I poured myself a drink and sank into the couch, staring at the spot where our family portrait had once hung. I'd taken it down earlier that day, unable to look at her face any longer. As the night stretched on, I felt the weight of it all settling over me, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the uncertainty of what came next. But beneath the pain, there was something else. A spark of resolve. This wasn't the end of my story. Not yet. The next morning, the house was quieter than it had ever been. Without Emily bustling around with her coffee or the kids arguing over breakfast, the silence felt oppressive. But it also carried a strange sense of relief. For the first time in weeks, maybe even months, I felt a sliver of control returning. I threw myself into work that day, focusing on the projects that had been piling up. Numbers made sense. They didn't lie or betray. By mid-afternoon, I'd cleared my schedule and set aside time to meet with my attorney to discuss custody arrangements. The kids were my priority now. Whatever happened with Emily, I wasn't going to let her lies drag them through the mud. That evening, as I sat at the dining table flipping through bills and legal forms, my phone buzzed. It was Marcus. You're not going to like this, he said, his tone cautious. I leaned back in my chair, already bracing for bad news. What now? I had someone do a deep dive into Daniel's finances and personal life, he said. Turns out he's not just cheating on his wife with Emily, he's also hiding assets. Offshore accounts, properties in his wife's name. The guy's playing every angle. I frowned, the puzzle pieces clicking into place. So, what's the angle? Why would Emily get mixed up with someone like that? Marcus sighed. That's where it gets murky. He's good at what he does, hiding things, making people believe what he wants them to believe. My guess? He's either using Emily to cover for something, or she's just another pawn in his game. The words hit harder than I expected. Even after everything, a small part of me had hoped that her betrayal was rooted in something real, something she believed in. But hearing this, it was like confirming she'd been duped just as much as I had. Keep digging, I said finally. If Daniel's as dirty as you say, I want every detail. I'm not letting this guy slither away unscathed. Got it, Marcus said. And Jack, be careful. Guys like Daniel don't play fair. By the time I hung up, the house felt darker, the air heavier. I stared at the paperwork on the table, the custody forms and financial disclosures waiting for my signature. It all felt so clinical, so detached from the reality of what had happened. This wasn't just numbers on a page, it was my life, my kids' lives. I poured a drink and took it to the living room, sinking into the couch. The family portrait I'd taken down the day before still sat on the floor, propped against the wall. I picked it up, running my fingers over the glass. Claire and Ethan looked so happy, their smiles bright and full of life. Emily and I were on either side of them, our arms wrapped around their shoulders. It was a perfect picture of a family that no longer existed. The following day, I received an unexpected call from Emily. Jack, she said, her voice hesitant. Can we meet? I think we need to talk. I hesitated, my grip tightening on the phone. About what? The kids, she said quickly. And everything else. Please, Jack. just hear me out. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a coffee shop downtown, a neutral territory where either of us could lash out too much. Emily was already seated when I arrived, her face pale and drawn. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. "Thanks for coming," she said, offering a weak smile. I didn't respond, just took the seat across from her and waited. She sighed, wrapping her hands around her coffee cup. "I know I've hurt you. And I know there's no excuse for what I did. But Jack, I'm scared." "Scared?" I repeated, my tone flat. "Scared of what?" "That Daniel's going to throw you under the bus when this all blows up?" Her eyes widened, and for a moment I thought she might deny it. But then she nodded, her shoulders slumping. "I didn't know, Jack. I swear, I didn't know what he was involved in. At first, it was just fun. An escape. But then he started asking for favors, small things at first. I didn't think much of it, but now, I don't know what to do." I leaned back in my chair, staring at her. "You don't know what to do?" I repeated. "How about taking responsibility for the mess you've made? How about putting our kids first for once?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't feel the usual pang of guilt. I was too angry, too exhausted to care. "Jack, please," she said, her voice cracking. "I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. But I'm trying to fix it. I just need your help." "My help?" I said, incredulous. "You want my help after everything you've done?" She nodded, desperation etched into every line of her face. "I don't know who else to turn to. Daniel, he's not who I thought he was. And if he finds out I'm backing away, then maybe you should have thought of that before you got involved with him." I snapped. "I'm not cleaning up your mess, Emily. You made this bed. Now lie in it." Her tears spilled over, but I stood and grabbed my coat. "We'll sort out the custody arrangements through the lawyers. Until then, stay away from me and the kids." "Jack," she started, but I was already walking away, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't look back. When I got home, I called Marcus. "We need to move faster," I told him. "Emily's unraveling, and Daniel's going to start making moves. Whatever we find on him, I want it airtight. No loose ends." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Understood. But Jack, be careful. You're playing with fire." "I don't care," I said. "If they thought they could ruin my life and walk away unscathed, they're in for a rude awakening." The days following my confrontation with Emily were a strange mix of tension and clarity. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of direction, even if the path ahead was jagged and treacherous. Marcus had promised me more details on Daniel's dealings by the end of the week, and I was counting the days. Emily hadn't reached out again after our meeting at the coffee shop. True to her word, she was staying with her sister, leaving me to navigate life with the kids on my own. Claire and Ethan, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around them, seemed happier without the subtle tension that had filled the house during the last months of our marriage. I found comfort in their laughter, their unshaken trust in me. But my focus on them was always broken by the gnawing thought of Emily and Daniel. What was their endgame? What had she gotten herself into? And, more importantly, how could I use it against them? On Thursday, Marcus called. "I've got something," he said, his tone grim. "You're going to want to sit down for this." I did as he suggested, the weight of his voice tightening my chest. "What is it?" "Daniel's company isn't just hiding assets," Marcus began. "He's been embezzling funds from his clients, big ones. Corporate accounts, real estate investments, even charitable donations. He's funneled millions into offshore accounts, and it looks like Emily's name might be attached to some of them." I froze, the blood draining from my face. "What do you mean, attached?" Marcus hesitated. "He's been using her as a proxy. Maybe she didn't know at first, but she's signed off on several transfers. If this comes to light, she could be implicated." The implications hit me like a truck. Not only had Emily betrayed me personally, but now she'd entangled herself, and by extension, our family, in something that could destroy all of us. Can you prove it? I asked, my voice tight. Yes, Marcus said. I've got the documents, the wire transfers, everything. It's ironclad. A bitter laugh escaped me. Unbelievable. She's managed to screw me over in ways I didn't even think were possible. Jack, this could get messy, Marcus warned. If Daniel realizes we're digging, he might try to cover his tracks. Or worse. Let him try, I said coldly. I'm not backing down. That evening, I sat at the dining table with a glass of whiskey, the documents Marcus had sent spread out before me. Each page was another betrayal, another piece of evidence that Emily's infidelity was only the tip of the iceberg. My hand shook as I flipped through them, anger and disbelief warring for dominance. I had two options. I could go straight to the authorities, blow the whistle on Daniel, and let the chips fall where they may. Or I could confront Emily again, give her one last chance to come clean and make things right before it all came crashing down. I decided on the latter. As much as I wanted to see her and Daniel burn for what they'd done, I couldn't bring myself to drag the kids through a public scandal, not yet. The next day, I called Emily. Jack? She answered, her voice tentative. What's going on? We need to talk, I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. In person. She hesitated. Is this about the kids? It's about everything, I said. Meet me at the house tonight. There was a long pause before she finally said, Okay. I'll be there. Emily arrived just after 8, her face pale and drawn. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, her usual polished appearance replaced by something raw and vulnerable. What's this about? She asked, stepping into the living room. I didn't waste time. I tossed the stack of documents onto the coffee table. You want to explain this? She froze, her eyes scanning the papers. As realization dawned, her hands flew to her mouth. Jack, I didn't. Don't, I snapped, cutting her off. Don't insult me by pretending you didn't know what you were signing. I've got everything, Emily. The transfers, the accounts, your signature on half of them. You're up to your neck in this. Tears welled in her eyes, but I felt nothing. No pity, no sympathy, just a cold, unrelenting anger. I didn't know, she whispered. Not at first. Daniel said it was all above board, that it was just a way to streamline his investments. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. Too late? I repeated, my voice rising. Too late for what? To come clean? To stop signing off on illegal transfers? She sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. I was scared, she said, her voice muffled. He said if I backed out, he'd ruin me. He has connections, Jack. Powerful ones. I laughed bitterly, pacing the room. And you didn't think to come to me? To tell me what was going on so we could figure it out together? I thought I could fix it, she said, looking up at me with tear-streaked cheeks. I thought if I just went along with it for a little longer, I'd find a way out. Well, congratulations, I said, gesturing to the papers. You've dug yourself into a hole so deep I'm not sure there is a way out. She broke down then, her sobs echoing through the room. But I didn't have the energy to comfort her. Instead, I sat down across from her, my voice cold and measured. This is what's going to happen, I said. I'm going to the authorities with this. You have two choices: cooperate and try to minimize the damage, or keep lying and let Daniel drag you down with him. Her eyes widened in panic. Jack, please. Think about the kids. Think about what this will do to them. I am thinking about them, I said, my voice sharp. That's why I'm not letting you or Daniel drag us any deeper into this mess. Emily stayed silent for a long time, her sobs subsiding into quiet sniffles. Finally, she nodded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. I'll cooperate, she said, her voice barely audible. Just please don't let it ruin them. It's too late for us, Emily, I said, rising to my feet. But I'll do whatever it takes to protect the kids. Even if it means protecting you. As I watched her leave, I felt a flicker of something unexpected: hope. Maybe, just maybe, this nightmare could still have a silver lining. But one thing was certain, Daniel wasn't going to get away with this. Not if I had anything to say about it. The days after Emily's reluctant cooperation were a whirlwind of planning and coordination. Every decision felt like walking a tightrope over a canyon, with the weight of our children's future hanging on whether or not I managed to expose Daniel without dragging the entire family into his mess. Marcus and I worked late into the night, reviewing the evidence he'd compiled, building a case so airtight even Daniel couldn't wiggle out of it. Emily, for her part, kept her distance. She stayed at her sister's house, only calling to check on Claire and Ethan. Her voice was always strained, filled with a cautious hope that maybe, somehow, I wouldn't go through with my plan. But she had no say in this anymore. I was done cleaning up her messes. On Friday morning, I sat across from Marcus in his office. He slid a folder across the desk, his expression grim. "This is everything," he said. "Wire transfers, offshore accounts, client testimonials. Enough to bury Daniel if it goes public." I opened the folder and scanned the documents. Each page was another nail in Daniel's coffin. Embezzlement, fraud, tax evasion, it was all there. "What about Emily?" I asked, my tone flat. Marcus sighed, leaning back in his chair. "She's implicated, no doubt about it. But if she cooperates and testifies against Daniel, there's a good chance the DA will cut her a deal. Minimal jail time, maybe even just probation." I nodded, my jaw tightening. The thought of her facing criminal charges still gnawed at me, no matter how much I told myself she deserved it. For all her faults, Emily was still the mother of my children. "What's next?" I asked. "We leak this to the authorities," Marcus said. "Anonymously at first. Once they start investigating, it's only a matter of time before Daniel's whole operation collapses." "But," he hesitated. "But what?" I pressed. "You need to be ready for blowback," Marcus said. "When Daniel realizes he's under investigation, he's going to start looking for who betrayed him. And if he figures out it was you—" I met his gaze, my expression hard. "Let him come." That evening, I called Emily and told her to meet me at the house. She arrived just after 7, looking pale and drawn. The weight of the past weeks had taken its toll on her, and for the first time in years, she seemed fragile. Vulnerable. "What's going on?" she asked, stepping into the living room. "We're moving forward," I said, gesturing for her to sit. "The evidence is going to the authorities. If you cooperate, Marcus says you'll probably get a deal." She sank into the couch, her hands trembling as she clasped them together. "What does that mean for me?" "It means you tell them everything you know about Daniel," I said. "Every lie, every scheme, every illegal transfer. You don't hold anything back." She nodded slowly, her eyes filling with tears. "Okay. There's one more thing," I said, sitting across from her. "You need to stay away from him. No contact, no texts, no emails. If he tries to reach out, you document it and send it to Marcus. Understand?" "Yes," she whispered. "I understand." "Good," I said, standing. "Because this is your one chance, Emily. Screw this up, and you're on your own." She looked up at me, her eyes pleading. "Jack, thank you?" "Don't thank me," I said coldly. "I'm not doing this for you." The next morning, Marcus and I met with an attorney who specialized in white-collar crime. We handed over the evidence, carefully explaining the situation and Emily's willingness to cooperate. The attorney's face remained impassive as he flipped through the documents, nodding occasionally. "This is solid," he said finally. "Enough to start an investigation, at least. If your wife testifies, she might even avoid charges altogether." "What about Daniel?" I asked. The attorney smirked. "With this much dirt, he won't just go down, he'll crash and burn." I felt a grim satisfaction at his words. For the first time in weeks, it felt like I was taking back control, turning the tables on the man who tried to destroy my life. The following week was a blur of interviews and legal filings. Emily sat down with the DA's office, her testimony corroborating the evidence we'd provided. I wasn't in the room, but Marcus was, and he told me later that she'd been honest and thorough, leaving no stone unturned. By the time the investigation went public, Daniel's empire was already crumbling. His accounts were frozen, his clients were fleeing, and the media had picked up the story, plastering his face across every news outlet. The man who had once seemed untouchable was now a pariah, his reputation in shambles. But the victory came at a cost. One evening, as I was putting the kids to bed, my phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. "Daniel knows. Be careful." I stared at the screen, a cold knot forming in my stomach. Of course he knew. Men like Daniel didn't go down without a fight. As I locked the doors and checked the windows that night, a nagging sense of unease crept over me. Daniel was cornered, desperate. And desperate men were dangerous. But I wasn't afraid. If he thought he could intimidate me, he was in for a rude awakening. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about protecting my family, no matter the cost. The days following Daniel's public exposure were a whirlwind of chaos. News outlets buzzed with reports of his financial crimes, and his empire collapsed like a house of cards. But the sense of triumph I'd felt was short-lived. Marcus's warning replayed in my mind like a broken record. "Daniel knows. Be careful." It didn't take long for the retaliation to begin. On a Wednesday morning, just as I was about to head to work, I noticed something strange. My car, parked neatly in the driveway the night before, now sat at an odd angle. As I approached, the sharp metallic glint of a slashed tire greeted me. The other 3 tires were the same, shredded beyond repair. A thick envelope sat on the windshield, the words, "Stay in your lane," scrawled across it in bold, red letters. My heart pounded as I ripped it open. Inside were photos, me with Claire and Ethan, taken from a distance. The kids playing in the backyard. Claire walking to the bus stop. Ethan on the soccer field. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I clenched the photos in my hand. This wasn't a veiled threat, it was a declaration of war. I called Marcus immediately. "They slashed my tires," I said, pacing the living room, "and left photos of my kids." Marcus cursed under his breath. "Damn it! I was afraid of this. What do I do?" I asked, my voice tight. "He's targeting my family." "First, stay calm," Marcus said. "I'll call some people and get security on your house. Cameras, alarms, the works. And I'll reach out to the authorities. Let them know Daniel's escalating." "Escalating?" I snapped. "He's threatening my kids, Marcus!" "That's not escalation, it's crossing the line." "I know," Marcus said. "But we've got to play this smart. Let the DA know what's happening and keep a record of everything. The more evidence we have against him, the better." By the time the security company arrived to install cameras and alarms, I'd called Emily and warned her to keep a close eye on the kids. To my surprise, she didn't argue. If anything, she seemed more frightened than I was. "This is my fault," she said quietly over the phone. "I brought him into our lives." "You did," I said bluntly. "But now we have to deal with it. So pull yourself together and stay alert." She didn't respond, but I could hear her sniffling on the other end. I hung up, unable to stomach her self-pity. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room, watching the security monitors on my phone. The sight of my house, bathed in the glow of infrared cameras, was both reassuring and unnerving. It felt like I was living in a fortress, preparing for an attack that could come at any moment. Around midnight my phone buzzed. It was Marcus. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "Daniel's already on the move." "What do you mean?" I asked, sitting up straighter. "I've been keeping tabs on his known associates," Marcus explained. "One of them booked a flight to Mexico this afternoon, likely to move money or lay low. And guess what? Daniel wasn't far behind." "Mexico?" I repeated, the pieces falling into place. "He's running." "Looks like it," Marcus said. "But he's still got people here. If he's threatening you, it means he's trying to scare you into backing off before he skips town." I clenched my jaw, the anger bubbling beneath the surface. It's not going to work. The next day, I met with the DA to discuss Daniel's threats. They assured me that additional measures would be taken to ensure my family's safety, but their words felt hollow. The law moved too slowly, too cautiously, and Daniel had already proven he didn't play by the rules. That evening, Emily showed up at the house unannounced. I hadn't seen her in days, and the sight of her standing on the porch, clutching her purse like a lifeline, was almost surreal. "Jack, I need to talk to you," she said, her voice trembling. I stepped aside, letting her in. "What is it?" She sat down at the dining table, wringing her hands. "Daniel called me." My stomach dropped. "What did he say?" "He told me to fix this," she said, her voice breaking. "He said if I don't get you to back off, he'll—" She stopped, unable to finish the sentence. I leaned forward, my fists clenching on the table. "He'll what, Emily?" She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "He'll hurt you. Or the kids." My mind raced, the weight of her words settling over me like a lead blanket. "And what did you tell him?" She hesitated. "I told him I'd try to talk to you." "Talk to me?" I said, my voice rising. "You think I'm going to back down now? After everything he's done?" "Jack, please," she begged. "He's dangerous. You don't know what he's capable of." I stood, pacing the room. "I don't care what he's capable of. He made this personal the second he threatened our kids." "Then let me help," she said, standing. "Please. I'll testify, I'll do whatever it takes. Just, let me help." I stared at her, the woman who had once been my partner, now a broken version of herself. Part of me wanted to push her away, to tell her this was her mess to clean up. But another part, the part that still clung to the idea of protecting our family, knew I couldn't do this alone. "Fine," I said finally. "But you listen to me, Emily. You don't make a move without telling me first. You don't contact Daniel, and you don't go anywhere near him. Understand?" She nodded, her tears spilling over. "I understand." "Good," I said, my voice cold. "Because if you screw this up, I won't be able to save you." As Emily left that night, I watched her car disappear down the street, a heavy weight settling in my chest. The war with Daniel wasn't over, not by a long shot. And I had a feeling the worst was yet to come. The tension in my chest hadn't eased since Emily's tearful confession the night before. Daniel's threats lingered in my mind, a dark cloud hanging over everything I did. I couldn't focus on work, couldn't enjoy time with the kids. Even with the security cameras and locks, I felt exposed, as though Daniel was always one step ahead. The only solace I found was in preparation. Marcus and I worked late into the night, hammering out every possible scenario, every legal and strategic move we could make to corner Daniel. If he wanted a fight, I was ready to give him one. On Monday morning, Marcus called with an update. "We've got him," he said, his voice triumphant. "The DA's office secured a warrant to freeze the rest of Daniel's accounts. Between the offshore money and his local assets, he's effectively broke." "That's great," I said, leaning against the counter. "But does he know yet?" Marcus hesitated. "Not officially. But I wouldn't put it past him to have some inside knowledge. Men like him always have a plan B." I nodded, the wheels turning in my head. "Then we can't let up. What's next?" "The DA wants to subpoena Emily for a formal deposition," Marcus said. "It'll lock in her testimony and make it harder for Daniel to discredit her if this goes to trial." The thought of Emily sitting in a courtroom, detailing her involvement with Daniel, made my stomach churn. As much as I resented her for what she'd done, I couldn't deny that she was trying to make things right. "When do they need her?" I asked. "Tomorrow morning," Marcus replied. "I'll pick her up and take her myself." "Good," I said. "Keep me posted." That evening, I sat down with Claire and Ethan to explain the changes happening at home. I kept it vague, telling them that their mom was staying with Aunt Kelly for a while and that we were all working hard to keep the family safe. Claire seemed satisfied with my explanation, but Ethan's sharp eyes stayed on me, searching for the truth I wasn't ready to give him. "Dad," he said as I tucked him in that night, "is Mom coming back?" I hesitated, my hand resting on his shoulder. "I don't know, buddy," I said honestly. "But no matter what happens, you and Claire are my top priority. Always." He nodded, his small hand gripping mine. "Okay." As I left his room, I felt the weight of their trust pressing down on me. I couldn't let them down. Not now. The next day, I met Marcus at his office after Emily's deposition. She was already gone, but Marcus looked grim as he handed me a folder of notes. "How did it go?" I asked, flipping through the pages. "Not great," he admitted. "She broke down halfway through, started crying about how Daniel manipulated her. The DA had to take a break to get her back on track." I frowned, my stomach twisting. "Do you think she'll hold up in court?" "She'll have to," Marcus said. "But I wouldn't count on her to be the star witness. Her credibility's shaky, especially with how much she's implicated in his schemes." I slammed the folder shut, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "So what now? We just wait for him to make the next move?" "Not exactly," Marcus said, leaning forward. "We've been tracking his associates. One of them, a guy named Victor Lang, just bought a burner phone at a gas station 2 towns over. We think Daniel's still using him to communicate." My jaw tightened. "Can we trace it?" "Already working on it," Marcus said. "But Jack, you need to be careful. If Daniel's desperate enough to threaten your family, he's desperate enough to try something worse." "Let him try," I said, my voice hard. "I'm done being afraid of him." That night, the first crack in Daniel's plan appeared. At 2 a.m., my phone buzzed with an alert from the security system. A shadow moved across the front yard, triggering the motion sensor. I sat up in bed, adrenaline surging through my veins as I grabbed my phone and opened the live feed. A man in a hooded sweatshirt lingered near the mailbox, looking around nervously before slipping something inside. He darted away, disappearing into the night before I could make out his face. I threw on a jacket and grabbed the baseball bat I kept by the door, stepping outside into the crisp night air. The neighborhood was silent, the streetlights casting long shadows across the pavement. The mailbox creaked as I opened it, my breath fogging in the cold. Inside was a single envelope, unmarked except for my name scrawled in messy handwriting. I tore it open, my heart pounding. "You have 48 hours to drop this, or you'll lose everything." The note wasn't signed, but the threat was clear. Daniel wasn't backing down. The next morning, I handed the note to Marcus. "He's escalating," I said, pacing his office. "First the photos, now this." Marcus examined the note, his face grim. "It's a scare tactic," he said. "He's trying to rattle you." "Well, it's working," I snapped. "What if he goes after the kids? Or Emily?" "We'll tighten security," Marcus said. "I'll get a team to monitor the house and Emily's location. But Jack, you need to keep your cool. If he thinks he's getting to you, he'll only push harder." I exhaled sharply, running a hand through my hair. "Fine. But we need to hit back." "And we will," Marcus said. "But not on his terms. We've got him cornered. He just doesn't know it yet." By the time I got home, the tension in my chest had only grown. Every shadow felt like a threat, every sound a warning. But as I stood in the doorway, watching Claire and Ethan play in the living room, a new resolve took hold. Daniel thought he could scare me into backing down, but he'd underestimated one thing: my determination to protect my family. He made this personal, and now it was my turn to make him pay. Daniel's threat echoed in my mind as I went about my day. The note was a clear message, and the clock was ticking. But if he thought I'd fold under pressure, he'd underestimated me. This wasn't just about justice anymore, it was about survival. He had threatened my family, and that was a line no one crossed. Marcus called mid-morning with an update. "We traced the burner phone Victor Lang bought," he said. "It's active, and we've linked it to several calls made to a private number in Mexico." "Daniel," I said, my grip tightening on the phone. "Most likely," Marcus confirmed. The DA is already moving to intercept the calls, but they'll take time to build a case. In the meantime, I've got someone watching Lang. If he makes another move, we'll know. Good, I said. What about Emily? Is she safe? She's staying at her sister's, and we've got a security detail keeping an eye on her, Marcus said. She's scared, Jack. I think she's finally realizing just how dangerous Daniel is. About time, I muttered. Keep me posted. That evening, I sat down with Claire and Ethan after dinner. They were both unusually quiet, sensing the tension that had gripped our home for weeks. I did my best to keep things light, but the worry in their eyes was unmistakable. Dad, Claire said, her voice hesitant. Is something wrong? I forced a smile, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. No, sweetheart. Everything's fine. Just some grown-up stuff I'm dealing with. She nodded, but I could see the doubt in her expression. Ethan, always the quieter of the two, simply stared at me, his brow furrowed. As I tucked them into bed later that night, I felt the weight of their trust pressing down on me. I couldn't let Daniel's threats take that away. Around midnight, my phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. Lang's on the move. Meet me at the office. I was out the door in minutes, adrenaline pumping through my veins as I drove through the dark, empty streets. When I arrived, Marcus was waiting with a map spread out on his desk. He's headed to a warehouse on the outskirts of town, Marcus said, pointing to a marked location. It's registered under one of Daniel's shell companies. What's he doing there? I asked. Not sure, Marcus said. But we've got eyes on him. If he's meeting with someone or moving anything, we'll know. I nodded, my jaw set. Let's go. The warehouse was an unassuming building, tucked away in an industrial area surrounded by chain-link fences and overgrown weeds. Marcus and I parked a safe distance away, watching as Lang's car pulled into the lot. He stepped out, looking around nervously before disappearing inside. Think he's alone? I asked. Doubt it, Marcus said, peering through binoculars. Guys like Lang don't operate solo. There's probably a small crew inside. As we watched, a second car pulled up, a black SUV with tinted windows. The driver stayed inside, the engine idling as Lang emerged from the warehouse to greet a tall, broad-shouldered man. Even from a distance, I recognized him. Daniel, I muttered, my fists clenching. Looks like he's not in Mexico after all, Marcus said. This just got interesting. We stayed low, watching as Daniel and Lang exchanged what looked like a briefcase. The tension was palpable, the air thick with the weight of what we were witnessing. What do you think's in the case? I asked. Cash, documents, maybe both, Marcus said. Whatever it is, it's enough to get him to show up in person. I snapped a few photos with my phone, capturing the exchange. We need to get closer. Careful, Marcus warned. If they see us, this whole thing blows up. We crept closer, sticking to the shadows as Daniel and Lang disappeared back into the warehouse. The SUV stayed parked, the driver lighting a cigarette and leaning back in his seat. My heart raced as we approached, every sound amplified in the stillness of the night. From inside the warehouse, muffled voices echoed, punctuated by the occasional clatter of metal. Marcus signaled for me to stay put as he moved closer, his camera snapping photos through a broken window. I stayed behind, my eyes on the SUV, ready to alert him if the driver made a move. Minutes felt like hours as I crouched in the darkness, my pulse hammering in my ears. Finally, Marcus returned, his expression grim. They're packing up, he said. Looks like Daniel's trying to move some of his assets before the authorities catch up to him. Did you get enough? I asked. Plenty, Marcus said, holding up his camera. But we need to get out of here before they spot us. We slipped away as quietly as we'd come, my mind racing with possibilities. Daniel was on the defensive, scrambling to protect what little he had left. It was the first real sign of weakness I'd seen from him, and it gave me hope that we were finally gaining the upper hand. The next morning, I sent the photos and details to the DA's office. Within hours, they raided the warehouse, seizing the assets Daniel had tried to hide. The news broke almost immediately, the headlines painting him as a desperate man on the run. But I knew better. This wasn't over, not yet. That evening, as I sat in the living room watching the coverage, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You should have left it alone. Now it's too late." I stared at the message, a cold fury settling over me. Daniel was cornered, and like any animal, he was lashing out. But I wasn't afraid. If he thought he could intimidate me, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. Daniel's text replayed in my mind as I sat in the living room, the words seared into my brain. "You should have left it alone. Now it's too late." The threat wasn't subtle. It was a declaration, a promise that he wasn't done with me or my family. But neither was I. I spent the next morning finalizing plans with Marcus and the DA. The raid on the warehouse had left Daniel with fewer options and even fewer allies. His network was unraveling, his funds depleted, and his influence waning. But desperation made him more dangerous, not less. "Do you think he'll come after you directly?" Marcus asked as we sat in his office, going over the latest developments. "I don't know," I admitted, my fingers drumming against the desk. "But I'm not going to wait around for him to make the first move." Marcus nodded, sliding a folder across the table. "This might help." The DA's team intercepted another call between Daniel and Victor Lang. "He's planning to leave the country within the next 48 hours. We're tracking his movements, but there's a chance he'll try something before he goes." My jaw tightened as I flipped through the transcripts. Daniel was cornered, and the mention of my name in their conversation confirmed what I already suspected. I was still on his radar. "Where is he now?" I asked. Marcus leaned back in his chair. "A safe house downtown, under one of his shell companies. The DA's preparing to raid it, but they're waiting for the right moment." I stood, grabbing my coat. "I'm not waiting. Jack," Marcus said, his tone sharp. "Don't do anything stupid." "I'm not," I said, my voice cold. "I'm finishing this." The safe house was a nondescript building on the edge of downtown, its windows covered with blackout curtains. I parked a block away, my heart pounding as I approached. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about taking back control, about ending the nightmare Daniel had brought into my life. I slipped into the alley behind the building, my breath visible in the chilly evening air. The faint sound of voices carried from inside, muffled but distinct. I couldn't make out the words, but I recognized the tone, Daniel's, barking orders. The back door was locked, but a quick twist with the crowbar I'd brought broke the latch. I stepped inside, the stale air thick with tension. The voices grew louder as I crept through the dimly lit hallway, each step measured, deliberate. I found Daniel in a makeshift office, pacing behind a desk cluttered with papers and a laptop. Victor Lang stood nearby, his expression nervous as he watched Daniel rant. "This isn't over," Daniel snarled, slamming his fist on the desk. "They think they've won, but they have no idea who they're dealing with." "I think I've got a pretty good idea," I said, stepping into the room. Both men froze, their heads snapping toward me. Daniel's eyes narrowed, his lips curling into a sneer. Well, the hero himself. Lang took a step back, his hands raised. "I'm out of this," he stammered, bolting for the door. I let him go. He wasn't my target. Daniel laughed, his tone dripping with disdain. "Brave of you to come here alone, Jack. Or just stupid. I don't need backup to deal with you," I said, my voice steady. "It's over, Daniel. The authorities are closing in, your assets are gone, and your little empire has crumbled." He smirked, leaning against the desk. "You think you've won? You're just a pawn in their game. They'll chew you up and spit you out just like they did me." "Maybe," I said, stepping closer. "But at least I'm not a coward who hides behind lies and threats." The smirk faltered, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. "You don't know what you're getting into." "Neither do you," I said. "Because when you went after my family, you made this personal." Before he could respond, the sound of sirens echoed outside, the flashing red and blue lights spilling through the cracks in the curtains. Daniel's expression twisted into rage as he realized what was happening. "You tipped them off," he hissed. "You tipped yourself off," I said, gesturing to the laptop. "They've been tracking you for days. You're done, Daniel." The front door burst open, the sound of boots thundering through the building. Daniel lunged for the desk drawer, but I stepped forward, slamming it shut before he could reach whatever was inside. "Don't," I warned, my voice low. He glared at me, his chest heaving, but he didn't move. Moments later, the room filled with officers, their weapons drawn. "Daniel Briggs," one of them said. "You're under arrest." As they cuffed him and led him away, I felt a strange mix of relief and emptiness. The man who had tried to destroy my life was finally facing justice, but the scars he'd left wouldn't fade so easily. The next few weeks were a blur of court hearings and depositions. Emily's testimony proved pivotal, helping to seal Daniel's fate. She was granted immunity in exchange for her cooperation, a decision I wrestled with but ultimately accepted. She had made mistakes, devastating ones, but she had also helped bring Daniel down. As the dust settled, life slowly began to return to normal. The kids were resilient, their laughter gradually filling the house again. Emily stayed at her sister's, and while we kept things civil for the sake of Claire and Ethan, there was no going back for us. Too much had been broken. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset, Marcus called. "It's over," he said simply. "Daniel took a plea deal. He's going away for a long time." I nodded, the weight on my shoulders finally lifting. "Thanks, Marcus. For everything. You did most of the heavy lifting," he said. "Take care of yourself, Jack." As I hung up, I looked out at the horizon, the colors fading into the darkening sky. The battle was over, but the scars remained. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: I'd survived. And for the first time in months, that felt like enough.